connected to iPhone.
It seemed that impossible a suggestion that there had been a gigantic flood across the Pacific Northwest. And it led Bretz into a lot of trouble and a lot of opposition from his colleagues, particularly from the pedestrian minds at the US Geological Survey, who cursorily checked Bretz's evidence and then decided that he must be 100% completely wrong. And one of the problems actually with Bretz's theory was that he wasn't able to provide a source for all the water that could have caused the flood. And as I said the other day, Bretz himself didn't care about that. He was looking at the effects on the landscape. The effects on the landscape were clearly caused by flood. And he said, really, it's not my problem where the water came from. Somebody else can work that out. But of course, that didn't satisfy his critics. And there was a famous event in 1927 where he was basically ambushed by a whole host of his peers, and I've quoted some of them here: O.E. Meister, James Gillooly, G.R. Mansfield. Before a theory that requires a seemingly impossible quantity of water is fully accepted, every effort should be made to account for the existing features without employing so violent assumption. James Gillooly says that Bretz's ideas are preposterous, incompetent, wholly inadequate. Mansfield doubts that so much work could be done in basalt in so short a time. And after this, Bretz became a pariah. Nobody would speak to him. Nobody would share information with him. He could not get funding for his research. And he was turned into an outcast from the politer precincts of society. But time went by, and the evidence wouldn't go away. And by the 1950s, Bretz's fieldwork was perfect, absolutely perfect. They could never fault his fieldwork. And they had to admit that really, it's hard to think of anything else that could cause this except a flood. But a flood, they didn't like that. It had to be gradual. The process had to be made gradual in some way, even though the evidence that Bretz had amassed indicated that it was a single event that rose and fell within 3 months. They had to be made gradual, and they gradually began to consider Bretz's evidence, and a team went down into the channeled scablands, and they came back and they sent a telegram saying, we are all catastrophists now. And Bretz, who was 83 at the time, said, be assured that after 30 years and 30 papers in self-defense and more than 30 people who vigorously denied my theory, it did my heart good like medicine. It was this toxic antipathy of the gradualists in the GSA that made a pariah and a social outcast of Bretz. But in 1979, the GSA actually awarded him the Penrose Medal, which is the most prestigious award in the field of geology, and it honors outstanding original contributions or achievements that mark a major advance in the science of geology. In other words, the mainstream is now accepting that there was cataclysmic flooding in the Columbia Scablands, and this plaque is put up on Dry Falls, which I'll show you a picture of at the moment, dedicated to J. Harlan Bretz, who patiently taught us that catastrophic floods may sometimes play a role in nature's unfolding drama. And of course, this little comment really says it all. When he receives the award, he says to his son, all my enemies are dead, so I have no one to gloat over. But the gloating must have been difficult even then for Bretz, because in order to get his flood evidence accepted, he had to accept a compromise. He had to accept a compromise that would say how the water got there in some more gradualistic manner. That eventually is what he did. Other geologists put forward the suggestion that the water had come from here. This is the famous glacial lake Missoula. Glacial lakes are a known phenomenon. They're a phenomenon in the world today, and a glacial lake can be impounded by an ice dam. it can cause a lake to grow behind the dam. There are serious problems with the ice dam issue regarding the glacial Lake Missoula. The notion that an ice dam 2,000 feet high could be sustained, when you go into it with the engineering of modern dams, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But nevertheless, here was the suggestion: water piled up in Lake Missoula, the ice dam broke, and the water poured across the channeled scablands, and that this happened once would not have been enough because there's not enough water in Lake Missoula. So it had to have happened many times, and the compromise was that Bretz, towards the end of his life, was that there had perhaps been as many as 8 floods out of Lake Missoula to account for this damage. Now, the orthodox geological opinion has it that there were as many as 80 floods spread out over a period of 2,500 years. And if that's true, then we are dealing with a gradualist event, and Bretz was not correct. And so this is what you'll see in all textbooks today as the explanation for the channeled scablands, that it was outburst floods from glacial Lake Missoula, many outburst floods over a period of about 2,500 years. And this makes it okay for magazines like National Geographic to look at Bretz's evidence and say, yeah, we understand that it was caused by flooding. But there are some of the landscape features that had originally convinced Bretz he was dealing with a single massive flood that are really difficult to account for by the multiple floods from Lake Missoula model. And one of them is this place, and this is called Dry Falls. It's a fossilized waterfall. There are 2 horseshoe lobes. There's a great fin of rock down the middle, and it all actually continues along here. It's a really giant place. It's completely dry. And the evidence that Bretz amassed on Dry Falls was that this whole thing had been created in about 2 weeks, actually. All waterfalls recede. As waterfalls pour over the edge of a lip, they wear it down, and they wind back. Niagara Falls has receded many miles in the last 12,000 years. What happened here was a recession up Upper and Lower Grand Coulee, and it stopped, just suddenly, completely stopped, and there's no water there anymore except rainwater that falls into it. So I'm here with Randall Carlson, who's a great catastrophist researcher, a good friend of mine, and we're at...
Making strides is like a huge party. 1 in 8 of us will be
at the foot of one of the lobes of Dry Falls. In the next shot, we're standing up looking down on that lobe of Dry Falls. It's only a tiny part of Dry Falls that we're looking at. It goes on all the way around here and all the way around here as well. But to give you a sense of the scale of it, if we put Niagara Falls into the picture, you can see that Niagara Falls is a really tiny thing by comparison with Dry Falls. And Niagara Falls is the result of 12,000 years of work of the river. The evidence is that this fall was created in one single incident very rapidly. And why? Because the flood that is coming down off the ice cap is packed with rubble and debris. There are whole forests that have been ripped up by their roots. There are hundreds of thousands of icebergs jostling in this flood. And so it's full of mud and rubble, boulders in the bottom of it. It's a highly erosive flow that is coming down, and it cuts the whole of Grand Coulee, cuts back up.
Yo, what up, everybody?
Falls, and then it stops.
Back at it again, like always.
Exposed as
gonna get back on this painting right here.
Waterfall.
Hopefully, I can finish this one up in the next couple days.
Another feature very hard to explain with the multiple floods are these current ripples on the Camas Prairie. Nature is fractal. Any of us see current ripples on a beach today. If we go to a sandy beach and the tide has gone out, you'll see ripples like this. They're caused by the receding tide, and of course they're an inch or half an inch high and a foot or 2 long. But here on Camas Prairie, the ripples are absolutely gigantic. And scale, we're looking down across Camas Prairie here. There's a car in the picture. And there again, these ripples are actually 50 feet high and 300 feet long. And they were caused by the rapid recession of floodwaters at the end of this cataclysm. And then, of course, the giant glacial erratics. This is above the town of Wenatchee in Washington state. We're about 500 feet up on the valley side. There's the bottom of the valley floor down there. This object is a very large boulder which does not come from this area. It was brought there and it was brought there in an iceberg. And that iceberg was carried on the flood, which was at least 500 feet above the valley floor at this point, was carried on the flood, and the bottom of the iceberg grounded against the valley floor, and it stuck there. And then the flood waters receded, the iceberg melted away, and left us this rock. And we're looking at an iceberg the size of an oil tanker that's capable of carrying an 18,000-ton rock like this. And it's not alone. There are thousands and thousands of these 10 to 20,000 ton rocks scattered all over the Pacific Northwest. Every single one of them dropped by an iceberg. Icebergs enchain rock all the time, and that's what we're looking at here. This one is actually called Boulder Park. It's
Fall super savings at American Freight. 2 mattress sets any size from only $298. Get a king and a queen, a twin and a full, 2 kings, 2 queens, or mix and match from only $298. Accent chairs from only $98. Huge sectionals from only $598. Take it home today with low, easy payments. No credit needed. Ends October 31st at American Freight. Now 4 great locations in Livonia on Schoolcraft, in Ann Arbor on Washtenaw, in Warren on
Let me see if I can save these blues. I might be able to use that again. Might be able to use that again.
Mainstream archaeologists are saying that the oldest ruins in the world, up until recently, were the ones in Malta. And these ruins here at Malta, and these ones here, Giganteja, which is on the island of Gozo in Malta. And archaeologists were saying that these were about 9,000 years old, to about 7,000 BC. And in fact, on Malta is this cave called the Gardalam Cave, and it's evidence of a big cataclysm that hit Malta, a huge wave that wiped Malta out, and Malta at that time must have been at least a...
Malta. Where is Malta? Is that on the that's in the, like, on the Mediterranean Sea, right? Malta? I'm not even sure, yo, where that place is at. Malta. Anyway, let's get some colors on this palette. So we're gonna go through the lightest mid-tones. Well, actually, it's gonna start off with the light mid-tones and then highlights. Normally I break down my tones in a trilogy of trilogies. So you got your dark, your mids, and your lights, right? But you have, you got 3 layers to your darks. You got your dark darks, your mid darks, and your light darks. The same thing with your medium tones, your dark mediums, your medium mediums, your light mediums. And so now I'm going to try to find the lightest shades for all 3 areas, for the darks, the mids, and the light tones. So more than likely, this is the darkest brown I use, Van Dyke brown. On this layer, I don't think I'm gonna pull this out, so I'm not gonna have to go this dark anymore. So my first color is gonna be some burnt umber. Might not even have to use a lot of this. I'm generally gonna lean towards this burny ochre and some transparent earth orange here for my dark and mid-tones. And then I'll lean towards this flesh tone, Naples yellow and white for my highlights. And like I said, maybe in just a few hours I can get this painting done. So here is, what is this? Some raw umber, burnt umber here. Just a dab, little dab. All right. Then where's my photograph? Come on, damn it. All right. Yeah, not gonna need to go too dark at all. I'm gonna use this and this. It's even Indian, maybe not even Indian red. I probably use some pink brown. Alright, so let's see how I'm gonna do this. Definitely gonna need some orange. Maybe a little bit of Naphthol, Caucasian, this right here, and maybe some Radiant Red. So I know it looks like a lot of colors, but it just helps me from blending a lot of these my own self. Okay, I'm also gonna pull out some maybe a little bit of this Indian yellow. So far we have burnt umber. Try to get these to go darkest to light. So my next shade is probably gonna be probably try to walk it down that way from dark to light. So some transparent earth orange. Some brown pink. So burnt ochre. That's a pretty color, man. I love this burnt ochre. Some Venetian. I always say that shit wrong. Red. So this is a red. It looks kind of brownish. It's a red. Then we're going to use Naphthol red. And this is really, really red. It's like fire engine red. I only need a little bit of that. We're going to get some of this Indian yellow. That's a very, very transparent color. Some of this permanent orange. Some radiant red. Some flesh tone. I might want a little bit of that. I think flesh tone is going to be my heavy color for this layer. I'm going to probably use that the most since I am trying to lighten it up. And then here is a little bit of Naples yellow. And I'm going to put a dab of white up here just in case. I don't normally like to lighten up skin tones with white. It's always better just to try to use a lighter color, a different, yellow is normally good for lightening up reds and browns, and yellow and orange. But I'll use white for, you know, more richer colors like blues. Sometimes you can lighten up blues with white, reds. But for the darker browns and reds, I'll normally use a flesh tone or a yellow to lighten them up. But like I say, sometimes you can use some white and throw some white up in there. So this is my fresh palette, my little dab of paint. Going from dark to light here, from dark to light there, and have these three. We're gonna try to, I know it looks okay right now, but I still need to put this paint on there. So people are like, oh, it looks finished. And no, it's not finished yet. It's almost done. Almost done. Almost. We're so close. We're so close to being finished. That's why it's starting to look good like that. All right, got that. Now I got to select some brushes because I take poor care of my brushes. I know I do. I need to do better. I try to, and I encourage other people to take care of their materials and their brushes, so you don't have to constantly invest in your supplies. So I'll probably use this brush, one of these brushes, something like that brush maybe. Maybe one of these. I'm going to use a lot of small brushes for her face.
Series of islands and maybe a land bridge to Sicily, and a bunch of pygmy elephants and hippopotami and other deer were washed into this cave. And so they know that some kind of cataclysm hit Malta. But now, mainstream archaeologists are saying that the oldest ruins in the world are at Göbekli Tepe, this place which is in southern Turkey. And at Göbekli Tepe, it is a megalithic site. Archaeologists are saying that this is 11 to 12,000 years old, going back to nearly 10,000 BC. It has many T-shaped megaliths, and on many of them are animals like foxes and serpents, and vultures are carved into it. This site was also purposely buried after it was, at some point after it was built. It's being excavated right now by German archaeologists. And this is all totally mainstream archaeology. Here's where it is, Göbekli Tepe. It's right near the Syrian border, actually, and conflict zone. The largest megaliths in the world that we know about are actually at Baalbek in Lebanon. And this is Baalbek. It's also near the Syrian border and is kind of a dangerous place to go. And what's there are these, a Roman temple is on top, but below it is a giant platform of blocks of limestone. Here are the blocks again. Right here, these giant blocks. They weigh about 1,000 tons.
Jamie, what up?
Which is extremely heavy for a stone. Some of the actually bigger stones that weigh like 1,200 tons are actually in the quarry nearby. And so archaeologists are looking at this, and the builders here they're building with blocks of stone that are just so incredibly big, so large that it boggles our mind. Why would people even try to build with giant blocks of stone like this? Mainstream archaeologists have to explain this, and here's how they do it. They're saying that the builders, and they're saying Romans in this case, would build a cage around these giant blocks, and they would put in the blocks small hourglass type cuttings, and then they would have little hourglass inserts that would fit into that, and then pulleys on the cage, and then they would, once it was all set up, they would
Just trying to find something to listen to right now.
The patriarchs of the Old Testament, such as Adam, Cain, that once existed, such as Lemuria and Atlantis. Fabulous stories abound of advanced cultures with their arts and technologies that have risen to great heights and then fallen back into the dust of history once again. understanding these rhythms and cycles of time help us to understand that our modern civilizations are not the first to have emerged, nor are they necessarily more advanced than previous ones that have come and gone. This new approach to history challenges the way we think about the past based upon our cultural, religious, and educational conditioning. These structures have helped humanity thus far understand the world, but which in today's rapid acceleration of planetary consciousness are very limited and starting to break down. They are overdue for transformation into a broader, more inclusive vision. The possibility of discovering and understanding the origin of the human soul and its divine pedigree is imminent in our time. We stand before a doorway leading to planetary illumination upon the greatest mysteries of life, the hidden history of humanity.
The intention of the Hidden History of Humanity project is to re-establish the correct chronology and timelines for human history. That's part of it. The other part of it is that humanity is disempowered in not knowing its true origins or indeed the chronology. So to establish the correct chronology and the understanding of the root races, how humanity came into being, and how the evolution of consciousness proceeded from there, is going to empower humanity with knowing the truth. Humanity is having the truth hidden from it at this point in time, but it is actually emerging. We have light emerging, we have truth emerging, and this is happening exoterically in parallel with this esoteric emergence of the Ageless Wisdom teachings.
Part of the intention of the Hidden History of Humanity series is to present a chronological sequence of history that demonstrates the evolution of consciousness by humanity, the mystery of when the human soul came into existence and its purpose. This first series will establish a broad structure of understanding for the future series that will elaborate further. Evolution will be traced from before the human race appeared through the stages of the Lemurian, Atlantean, and current root races. It will finish with contemporary humanity that is now transitioning into the sixth root race. It will discuss the evolution that will unfold in the future, always in the context of what has transpired. It has been said that unless we understand our history, then we are condemned to repeat the mistakes of the past. On the scientific side, several key areas will be explored in this history of the root races, such as geology, geography, astronomy, archaeology, and anthropology. From the religious angle, some of the most ancient works will be referenced: the Hindu, Jewish, Persian, Islamic, Buddhist, Gnostic, Celtic, and Christian traditions. Investigating the hidden history of the world means that we must return to discover the birth of the solar system, of which our Earth is but one participant. stupendous questions will be explored as to how this solar system came into existence with its subsequent planetary schemes, chains, rounds, and globes.
Modern science insists upon the doctrine of evolution. So does human reason and the secret doctrine. The idea is corroborated in ancient legends and myths, and even by the Bible when it is interpreted esoterically. We see a bud slowly developing from a seed and a flower from the bud. But what of the seed with its predetermined program of physical transformation? What about the invisible, therefore spiritual forces which gradually develop its form, color, and perfume? The word evolution speaks for itself. The origin of the present human race pre-existed in its parent race as a seed, in which lies hidden the flower of the next race. The ancestors of the present elephant and lizard may have been the mammoth and the plesiosaurus. Why should not the originators of our human race have been the giants described in the ancient Hindu Vedas or the Book of Genesis? There are several keys to the mysteries, past, present, and future, of the 7 great root races and the 7 great cycles. Every symbol and allegory is said to have 7 keys, the 7 keys to the entrance of the door of the mysteries, and that each key must be turned 7 times.
Well, the ageless wisdom has been called the perennial philosophy as well. It's ageless because it's timeless. It's the same verities and truths that exist throughout all time. And the ageless wisdom teachings come through to us in many forms, through mythology, through various amanuenses who have been transmitters of the teachings from the hierarchy of the masters of wisdom, through the ancient Vedas, of course, through the spiritual traditions that exist universally. These various frequencies of the ageless wisdom teachings are available for people to plug into at whatever level of understanding that they have reached thus far in their soul evolution.
There are several other keys to this study that include psychology, physiology, metaphysics, astrology, and sacred geometry. The synthesis of even a few of these keys will shed light upon the evolution of consciousness in the human kingdom, the purpose of the human soul, and its existence. For many, to be told that the age of thinking humanity is around 18.6 million years may invite some disbelief or even derision and ridicule. Such is the state of Maya, or illusion, in which we all live, conditioned by thousands of years of wrong thinking, religious propaganda, ignorance, and lack of spiritual education. The somewhat overdeveloped concrete mind of humanity in this 5th root race is a particular liability, in that it does not recognize the subtle so easily, only that which is tangible. History, with its many evidences of past civilizations, is in a tangled and confused state. Humanity's approach to our past has imposed upon itself the limitations of dogmatic science and theology, ignoring the ancient traditions that hold the keys to many of these riddles. We live in a time of the approaching astronomical cycle of Aquarius, where the ancient mysteries will be reinstated after thousands of years of being hidden from the eyes and ears of the profane. Humanity stands at the doorway of initiation into the mysteries of history and higher consciousness. There are many isolated strands in history that can be drawn together. There are many facts that can be collated, especially those corroborated by direct as well as inferential evidence found in ancient literature and history. This is one of the fundamental purposes of the Hidden History of Humanity Project's books and video series. Much of this ancient literature is contained within the Hindu Puranas, the Upanishads, the Rig Veda, the Mahabharata, and the Ramayana. This is logical, for the Hindu tradition is the oldest of our current races. In the Puranas, the meaning and chronological order is very clear. We can count generations of the Manus and their series of incarnations as heroes in the old stories. The Manu sets the tone and type of any given race in terms of its evolutionary goal. The ancient book of Manu gives a complete narrative of creation with a chronology of the divine ages of the heroes through to the appearance of man on earth. Likewise, in the Egyptian tradition, all the lists of past kings were recorded carefully, documenting races and subraces reaching right back into ancient Atlantean and Lemurian history. The most recent references to our current fifth root race also come to us from the Old Testament, where the history of all the human races is contained in the first 6 chapters of Genesis. Much of this will also be explored in this series. Genesis, from chapter 4, verse 16, through to the end of the 5th chapter, gives purely historical facts taken word for word from the secret book of Numbers in the Great Oriental Kabbalah. The patriarchs of the Old Testament, such as Adam, Cain, and Seth, are the same as the Hindu Manus who set the tone, impulse, and purpose for each evolution in the root races, sub-races, and branch races.
The Book of Revelation, chapter 17, verse 10, has preserved a tradition that speaks of the 7 races, where there are 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come.
This passage refers to the 5 root races that have elapsed, including our 5th root race that is almost finished. That which is not yet come refers to the coming 6th and 7th root races. Interpretation of the Bible, both in the New and Old Testaments and based upon the secret sciences, has yet to be fully exposed with its many allusions to the septenary constitution of earth and man, to the 7 major cycles or rounds, and the 7 root races. The ancient Greek tradition was also a repository of the ageless wisdom, encoded throughout its wonderful and deeply evocative mythology. The Greek allegories give to Atlas 7 daughters, representing the 7 subraces of Atlantis. These daughters are the mothers of famous heroes, the founders of many nations and cities. Astronomically, Atlas's daughters are the 7 Pleiades. The 2 are connected with nations whose destinies are shaped by the past events of their early lives, according to universal karmic law. In the Greek tradition, the root races are divided into the Golden, Silver, Bronze, and Iron Ages, and have an identical correspondence to the Hindu Yuga cycles, such as the Kali and Satya Yugas. The three one-eyed giants of Greek mythology are a reference to the last subraces of the Lemurian root race. Hence, we can see the sources of the ageless wisdom or perennial philosophy that lay hid in universal mythology and religion. The same or similar stories are told in all cultures, indicating the consistency and veracity of these ancient stories within the collective consciousness of humanity.
Mythology is one of the great keys to studying the mysteries, because the mysteries are encoded in mythology, in Greek mythology, in Scandinavian mythology, in mythology of all traditions. Like music, mythology is one of the great universal languages that we can understand and which anyone can tap into quite easily for understanding the archetypes of the gods that are described in the various stories. In mythology, we have the stories of all the planets and their relationship to one another, personified by the planetary gods. We have Zeus, Jupiter, and Mars, and Venus, and Mercury. They all have these various stories which describe their interrelationship with one another. The ancient wisdom teachings are encoded in all mythologies, East and West.
And you guys will notice over and over and over, they leave Africans out of everything. East and West, and that's all they talk about, East and West. They never talk about any other origins, the origin stories from any of the ancient African tribes, or African cultures and shit like that. None of the spiritualities, structures of ancient African civilizations. They're only focusing on Asian, Middle Eastern, and Indian. And where the fuck did they get all that shit from? You know what I'm saying? Where did they get their spiritual teachings and all that shit from?
In a busy world,
it's weird as fuck how they always refuse to give credit where credit is due.
Conditioned views of the Western Bible and or modern science,
this is
both of which
a film put together by a European
offer more than
talking to Europeans, so it's going to be filtered like that.
However, this is changing in some fields of science, going back into hundreds of thousands or millions of years in some cases. In our current fifth root race, resonant with 5, the number of mind, there has been achieved a perfection, refinement, and quintessential expression of the concrete mind. Although this has brought many benefits in science and technology, its shadow expression via the critical mind tends to be separative at the expense of the love principle. The lower mind only functions through the 5 tangible senses. In the coming Aquarian cycle, the secret sciences will blend more fully with mainstream science. The 6th sense, or intuition, is in its early stage of development in this imminent 6th root race. Hence, perception of the more subtle aspects of human evolution, such as the aura, chakras, and the invisible forces behind nature, is still limited, unrecognized, and unrealized by the majority. With regard to our history, there are many crystallized belief systems that influence current world thinking. They are compounded by an unquestioning and undiscriminating acceptance under the authority of modern science or religion. Likewise, history tends to stay in a straitjacket of conformist, consensus thinking that excludes any other viewpoints. This is changing, however, almost imperceptibly, as inquirers from many disciplines are questioning existing viewpoints of the status quo. They are uncovering more and more evidence that will continually transform current thinking. This Hidden History of Humanity Project series is part of this incoming wave, expanding our worldview, pushing us ever forward in our evolution. There is one boundless, immutable principle, one absolute reality, which antecedes all manifested conditioned being. It is beyond the range and reach of any human thought or expression. The manifested universe is contained within this absolute reality and is a conditioned symbol of it. Our planet and the whole cosmic scheme with its suns, constellations, galaxies, and attendant planets are part of one great cosmic plan whereby ever-increasing expansion of consciousness occurs. The Buddha said, "Veil after veil will fall, but veil after veil remains." The cosmos is ever expanding. Speculation on the intelligences and hierarchical orders of worlds is evident in many traditions. One can only ponder on the rich diversity of life within this living cosmos. All of these factors inform us that we cannot possibly be the only form of creative intelligence in this vast panorama of worlds. And humanity is coming to this gradual realization and imminent revelation in fact. The Earth incarnates over many vast cycles called rounds or manvantaras in the Hindu parlance. These cycles pour through the various so-called globes, chains, and schemes of Earth evolution.
The rounds are enormous periods of time, and there are 7 rounds that correspond to each planetary incarnation or globe of the so-called planetary logos. And we are currently in the 4th round of 7 rounds at the moment. And this has brought about an elapsed time of around about 1.93 billion years. We are halfway through this globe period. And these rounds are broken up into 2 other lesser cycles of 317 million years each, and these are called manvantaras. Manvantara, though, can be a generic name applied to any cycle. It literally means between 2 manus, and the manu is the being who sets the archetype for any particular race. So these 7 rounds are opportunities for the incarnating monads of the planet to gain experience by incarnating upon these streams of energy, which we call rounds, and subsequently find their incarnation into the various root races, sub-races, and branch races.
In this diagram of the Earth scheme are 7 large circles called chains. Within each of these large circles are 7 smaller circles called globes. The planets are called schemes because behind the visible outer planet are a series of worlds in more subtle matter called globes and chains. A planetary scheme holds within it the microcosm of the entire solar system. Our planetary logos, which is the ensouling entity of our physical Earth, undergoes many incarnations, which are called globe periods. There are 7 globes that are contained in a chain of globes. These 7 chains in a scheme make a total of 7 times 7 equal 49 globes. They represent past and future incarnations of the life we call a planetary logos, or God, upon our planet. Note that the current incarnation of the Earth is chain number 4, the central chain of the 7 chains. The 3rd chain is also called the moon chain, a previous incarnation of the Earth,
break real quick.
for which our moon today is a remnant and reminder.
So the rounds and globes and chains refer to the greater picture of evolution. So if we're considering the whole solar system as an incarnation of the great life that emanates from Sirius, then we can get into a little bit more detail within the solar system. Every planet in the solar system is regarded as a planetary scheme, and within that scheme exists the globes and the chains of each particular planetary scheme, which is a microcosm of the entire solar system. So various globes and chains within the Earth scheme are named the Neptune chain or the Venus globe and so forth. And of course, all these planetary schemes within the solar system are connected to one another.
In time and space today, our Earth scheme is currently in the 4th globe of the 4th chain, about halfway through its evolution. It is now
I had to go to the bathroom.
25th globe, or incarnation of a total of 49
I had to go to the
globes in the
bathroom.
Earth scheme. A globe period lasts for 4.32
What up,
billion
homie?
years.
Let's see. Where the hell your ass
The solar
go?
system as a whole is said to be at the middle point of its evolution, but on a much larger scale of some 155 trillion years. The Yuga cycles have been described as symbolic by many modern scholars, but they are also literal in terms of time measurement. These are stupendous time scales, yet if one seriously studies and reflects upon the ancient Hindu Yugas, it will be found that they have an innate beauty and truth that transcends our modern measurements of time.
The law of periodicity is basically the science of cycles. So periodically, these cycles recur over periods of time, they repeat, but they repeat on different turns of the evolutionary spiral. So we have cycles of the rays, we have cycles of the planets. And we, of course, have cycles of the zodiac. We have the precession cycle of the zodiac every 25,920 years. So we have many, many wheels within wheels to study in the science of cycles, and it can get very confusing. The Yuga cycles of the Hindu tradition are based upon the precession cycle of the sun going through the zodiac. So we have a 2,160 years cycle of the sun precessing through Aquarius, through Pisces, and so forth. And if we multiply the 2,160 years cycle by 2, we get 4,320, which Blavatsky tells us is a magical cipher that we can use to calculate some of these cycles called the yugas.
Here is a simple representation of the proportion of the 4 yugas that comprise a Maha Yuga, or Great Wheel. The lesser yugas, or wheels, are the wheels within wheels. The yugas above describe the 4 yugas of this current 5th root race that started almost 4 million years ago, starting with the Satya Yuga and moving clockwise through the lesser yugas to finish at the Kali Yuga that started around 3000 BC.
Humanity has required eons for physical and mental development to evolve into its relatively sophisticated modern state. What do you think? Have you ever wondered just how long it has taken human evolution to unfold? Have you accepted what you were told at school or believed what adamant biblical scholars have declared? Or have you gone along with modern science's authority? How can we consider a longer time frame for history which ultimately conceals the greatest puzzles of existence and the mystery of the human soul? When the traditions of the most ancient cultures are consulted, we find, for instance, that the Hindu Tamil calendar, known as the Tirukanda Panchanga, gives the beginning of our strictly human evolution in this cycle at around 18.6 million years. These cycles also go back into trillions of years, and the Mayans have documented them in the billions. Are these figures fanciful, symbolic, or factual and literal? Although there are paradoxes about certain timescales between ancient sources and modern science, there is agreement about some of the really big cycles. For instance, noted scientist, the late Carl Sagan, said,
"The Hindu religion is the only one of the world's great faiths dedicated to the idea that the cosmos itself undergoes an immense, indeed an infinite, number of deaths and rebirths. It is the only religion in which time scales correspond to those of modern scientific cosmology. Its cycles run from our ordinary day and night to a day and night of Brahma, 8.64 billion years long, longer than the age of the Earth or the Sun." Physicist Fritjof Capra, in his best-selling book, wrote, "This idea of a periodically expanding and contracting universe, which involves a scale of time and space of vast proportions, has risen not only in modern cosmology, but also in ancient Indian mythology. Experiencing the universe as an organic and rhythmically moving cosmos, the Hindus were able to develop evolutionary cosmologies which come very close to our modern scientific models.
Revitalizing the truths of this existing paradigm of the science of cycles is another purpose of the Hidden History of Humanity project. It is an inherent part of the ancient wisdom of several cultures, part of our racial memory that we can all intuitively tap into, recognize, and understand. The key is to experiment with these laws by not dismissing them out of hand. Inquirers in their specific disciplines may find a great expansion of understanding through the application of the law of cycles. All cycles take place to a lesser degree within the time span of the so-called 7 root races, whilst a far vaster reach of time encompasses the globes, chains, and schemes. Humanity is somewhat disempowered in not understanding its past, which is the origin and purpose of the human soul. Also, there has not been a fixed time from which to reckon, by which to measure history. And saddled with the shortened chronology that is supposed to explain the entire unfoldment of the human race, a distorted reality has been created. The spiritual path is one of forever peeling back layers of illusion, and the mystery of human evolution is one of the greatest secrets yet to be fully revealed. As noted earlier, modern science and the secret sciences roughly concur on some of the big cosmic cycles. Yet it is ironic that in the time scales for the sciences, such as archaeology and anthropology, there is required a huge addition of time for the birth of civilization, from 3000 to 4000 BC back to 18.5 million years. Equating the esoteric record of time with the current accepted geological record, there is a massive subtraction of time, from around 65 million years for the Jurassic Age, down to 28 to 20 million years for the esoteric doctrine. The big dinosaurs may well have existed 65 million years ago, yet the esoteric doctrine states that the reptile extinction was closer to 20 million years ago. Disparities and contradictions abound, yet they are not unresolvable or irreconcilable. Consider that around 500 years ago, it was thought that the sun orbited the Earth and that the Earth was flat. Now, that illusion has been stripped away and transcended thanks to the astronomer Copernicus. Yet despite all the amazing scientific advances since then, accompanied by expansions of human consciousness with regard to Earth's true history, in some ways, we still live in relatively medieval times. Now, humanity's next phase of penetrating the veil of Maya is to understand just exactly how old it is. Time is an illusion. Yet just as a human being has its allotted lifespan, so do all other lives. Plants, solar systems, galaxies, races, civilizations, and nations. All entities, therefore, have a measurable cycle in which to achieve certain goals in their evolutionary pattern. Esoteric cycles are based upon the astronomical precession of the Earth orbiting the Sun. It takes 2,160 years for the Sun to precess through one sign of the zodiac. From here, all the greater cycles are measured.
In this simple table, the chronology of science is on the right-hand side, whilst the chronology of the secret sciences is on the left. The figures are in millions of years. Even though there are large disparities between the figures, when more understanding of the process of dating the Earth is acquired, these figures will concur with one another. In this table, we can see that the astronomical precession cycle of 2,160 years is the basis for all the greater cycles, of how 12 of these cycles create a great year of 25,920 years, of how multiples of the 4,320 cycle create the figures of the Hindu yugas. And then as we move down the table, we can see how these yugas mathematically compose the Mahayugas and the Manvantaras, or rounds. Eventually, a day of Brahma is reached, delineating the time for an entire globe period, or one incarnation. In each globe incarnation of Earth, there are 7 major cycles of evolution, also called rounds. The rounds are composed of 2 cycles each, called Manvantaras, that total 14 in all. The rounds are cycles wherein the life wave of human spirits incarnate through a planetary scheme and its chains and globes. This human life wave experiences life in all kingdoms, starting with the mineral, vegetable, animal, human, and finally the kingdom of souls.
What is our purpose as spiritual monads to embark upon such a long journey through all the kingdoms? Part of the answer to this mystery is to evolve and grow, and to bring evolution upon Earth to perfection, eventually to the status of a so-called sacred planet. This has ramifications for the greater life of the solar system and its own evolution as a whole. We can see, therefore, the inseparability of ourselves from the great Creator and all kingdoms in nature, for they are all modes of expression for this great being to redeem, purify, and transform into higher consciousness, thereby eventually joining a greater evolution with the other planets in the solar system.
Now, the rounds are the cycles of time of the various groupings of monads that cycle through the globe and chain of a particular scheme. The rounds extend for a period of 617 million years, and they are composed of 2 Manvantaras, which are 308 odd million years each. And so there is a certain in-breathing and out-breathing of these Manvantaras, or cycles of time.
In each of the great cycles we call rounds, there are 7 root races. Combined with the 7 rounds, this makes a total of 7 times 7, or 49 root races in a globe period. As above, so below. Just as we explored the 49 globes of the planetary scheme, so this evolution is reflected in the 49 root races in just one globe period. These rounds and root races provide the physical body of incarnational experience for our Earth Logos. Human souls are light cells within this greater body of God. Within each root race are 7 subraces, and within each subrace are 7 branch races. 7 times 7 times 7 equals 343 races, all with their allotted cycles, providing a highly diversified human expression throughout the ages. The branch races, in their turn, give birth to the nations.
A root race is a planned unfoldment of consciousness where a certain archetype is created by the so-called Manu of the races, and various civilizations unfold within that particular time period of a root race, which of course encapsulates 7 sub-races and 7 branch races within each sub-race, giving many, many different incarnations, possibilities of civilizations, and of course all the soul groupings, the 7 race soul groupings who incarnate through those particular branch races and sub-races and root races to gain experience, and of course all aim towards enlightenment and liberation ultimately.
Hence the nations that come and go are the leaves upon this tree of life. They have their autumns and springs and constitute the shortest cycles of a few thousand years. The smaller branches that support the leaves are the branch races with cycles that correspond to a 26,000-year precession cycle. The larger branches embody the much larger cycles of the subraces. The trunk of the tree represents the largest cycle embodied by a root race. All the races and subraces that evolve are seeds for the next level of evolution. All races and subraces have a long overlap, so whilst one race is unfolding, it will give birth to another distinct race that will unfold on a partially parallel timeline. Although this is a 2-dimensional diagram, we can think of time and evolution as spiralic. The root races started around 150 million years ago, during the latter part of that immense cycle we call the 4th round. The first 2.5 human races were in the subtle or etheric realm, and gradually evolved into a physical form with skin and bones in the middle of the 3rd root race of Lemuria. Human bodies were enormous in those times, but through development of the mental principle, became smaller and more refined.
Halfway through the 3rd or Lemurian root race, in the precise evolutionary cycle, a magnificent preordained spiritual event occurred on Earth. It was the coming of the Lords of Flame, who imparted the spark of mind to humanity. This was a humanity who were hitherto only members of the animal kingdom, with animal instinctual awareness and in reality no mind. This period is known as individualization, and it is where Earth's greatest mysteries lay hidden. The Lords of Flame are also known as Kumaras, and emanated from an evolution from within the Earth scheme called the Venus Chain. It was an evolution associated with Venus, but not from the planet Venus per se. Remember, each planet is a scheme of chains and globes, which are a